What's up everybody? Welcome to the video. It's Ryan here on the Max Afterburner channel. Former F-15E combat fighter pilot, F-16 Thunderbird pilot, airline pilot flying the Boeing 737 and the Airbus A220. This Iran war has already given us a lot of firsts, new missiles, new drones, lasers, torpedo attacks we haven't seen since World War II, but this latest one might be the most quietly significant of the entire conflict. CENTCOM just confirmed the first ever combat use of autonomous surface strike vessels, unmanned attack boats that just hit a naval facility deep inside Iran, and I don't think most people watching this even know this capability existed yet. Let's break down exactly what happened, what these things actually are, and why I think this specific weapon could end up mattering a lot more long-term than a single strike suggests. I'm going to walk through exactly what happened at Bandar Abbas, then explain what these Corsair vessels actually are and how they're different from everything else we've talked about in this war, then get into why using something like this against a naval facility specifically makes so much sense. Then I'll cover some of the other weapons debuts this war has already produced for context, and finish with my take on what this actually signals about where naval warfare is heading. On July 12th, 3 Saronic Corsair one-way attack sea drones struck Iran's Bandar Abbas naval base. CENTCOM confirmed the operation the following day, and it marked the first confirmed American combat use of autonomous surface strike vessels, meaning unmanned boats, not submarines, not aircraft, actual uncrewed surface vessels, carrying out an offensive strike mission. The specific target was a submarine and ship maintenance facility at the base, and one of the most striking images to come out of this whole operation is the forward view captured from one of the Corsairs itself, as it closed in on a Ghadir-class midget submarine sitting under a maintenance gantry at the facility. This strike happened as part of the broader campaign CENTCOM has been running against Iranian air defense systems, coastal radar, missile and drone capabilities, and small boats threatening navigation around the Strait of Hormuz, the same overall campaign I've been covering in several of my recent videos. But this specific piece of it stands apart because it's not just another strike using an existing weapon. It's the combat debut of an entirely new category of American naval capability. So let's break down what we're actually talking about here. The Saronic Corsair is an autonomous surface vessel, essentially an uncrewed boat designed to be sent on one-way attack missions, similar in concept to a lot of the loitering munition drones we've talked about in the air domain, but built for the maritime environment instead. No sailors on board, it's guided to its target and used to deliver a strike, accepting the loss of the vessel itself as part of the mission rather than needing to recover it afterward. That expendability is actually the entire point, and it's worth understanding why that's such a valuable characteristic in a contested environment like the Strait of Hormuz. Modern surface combatants, actual crewed Navy ships, carry a finite number of missiles, and reloading vertical launch missile cells at sea is genuinely difficult. It's not something you can just do on the fly in a combat zone. Every time you use an expensive missile off a destroyer, that's one less round in the magazine until you can get back to a port with the right facilities to reload. A Corsair-type vessel gives commanders an alternative. You can use a relatively low-cost, expendable platform against a suitable target and preserve your limited supply of high-end missiles for targets that actually require that level of firepower, mobile launchers, integrated air defense systems, hardened command facilities, the kind of targets where you genuinely need your best weapon and nothing else will do the job. There's also a tactical advantage that has nothing to do with cost. These vessels can be distributed across a wide area, the Gulf of Oman, the Arabian Sea, the approaches to the Strait itself, which makes it a lot harder for Iran to figure out where any given attack is actually going to come from or which stretch of their coastline is under threat at any given moment. Compare that to a large, crewed warship, which is a single, identifiable, high-value asset that has to weigh very carefully how close it's willing to operate to a defended coastline. A distributed fleet of smaller, expendable, unmanned vessels changes that calculation completely. You can push presence deep into contested waters without risking American sailors or a billion-dollar hull every time you do it. I want to explain why hitting a submarine maintenance facility with this specific weapon is such a smart application beyond just it's a new toy. A facility like the one at Bandar Abbas exists to service and maintain vessels like that Ghadir-class midget submarine. These are exactly the kind of small, hard-to-detect, asymmetric naval assets that fit into Iran's broader strategy. We've talked about in earlier videos, using large numbers of smaller, cheaper platforms, rather than trying to match a conventional Navy hull for hull. Disabling the infrastructure that services and maintains those submarines has a multiplying effect. You're not just damaging one vessel, you're degrading Iran's ability to keep its broader midget submarine fleet operational and ready over time. And using an unmanned surface vessel to do that job specifically avoids putting any American sailors anywhere near a defended naval facility to accomplish it. That's the kind of mission profile that historically might have required either a submarine-launched strike, an airstrike accepting some risk of exposing an aircraft to coastal defenses, or in an earlier era, something dramatically riskier like a special operations raid. Being able to accomplish that same objective with an expendable, uncrewed platform is a genuinely different risk calculation for military planners. I think it's worth putting this in context of everything else this conflict has already debuted, because this war has honestly turned into one of the most significant live testing environments for new military technology in recent memory. Early in the conflict, U.S. forces used the Precision Strike Missile, a Lockheed Martin ballistic missile fired from HIMARS launchers, in combat for the first time, giving ground forces a deep strike option out to roughly 300 miles that didn't exist in this form before. Around the same time, CENTCOM confirmed the first combat use of Lucas, the low-cost unmanned combat attack system, which is honestly one of the more interesting stories of this entire war. It's a one-way attack drone that the U.S. deliberately built by reverse engineering a captured Iranian Shahed drone, essentially taking Iran's own cheap drone playbook and turning it back against them at a fraction of the cost of more sophisticated munitions. There's also been extensive use of directed energy weapons in this conflict. The U.S. military's HELIOS and ODIN laser systems, alongside Israel's Iron Beam system, all used to intercept incoming Iranian drones, which is itself a genuinely new chapter in how air defense gets done, using focused energy instead of interceptor missiles for at least some threat categories. And on the other side, Iran hasn't been standing still either. They've fielded new or upgraded long-range missiles like the Khorramshahr 4 and an extended-range version of the Hajj Qassam, and more recently claimed the first combat use of a new mobile air defense system called Arash-e-Kamangir, which they say brought down a U.S. MQ-9 Reaper near Keshem Island. Analysts who've looked at that specific claim generally think it's less a revolutionary new system and more a further development of Iran's existing mobile, lower-cost air defense approach, but even that tells you something important. Iran retains at least some capacity to adapt and push back even after months of sustained bombardment. So the Corsair debut isn't happening in isolation. It's the newest entry in what's already been a running theme of this entire war. Both sides field testing genuinely new capabilities against a real live adversary, rather than in a training exercise, which is an opportunity that doesn't come along very often and one that both militaries are clearly using to the fullest. I mentioned the Black Sea comparison earlier, but I want to actually unpack it a bit because I think it's the single best real-world case study for understanding just how disruptive this category of weapon can be over time, not just in a single strike. Ukraine doesn't have anything resembling a conventional navy that could challenge Russia's Black Sea fleet in a traditional ship-to-ship engagement. What they did have was a growing arsenal of relatively cheap, explosive-laden unmanned surface vessels, and they used them relentlessly against Russian ships, port infrastructure, and even the Kerch Bridge over an extended campaign rather than a single dramatic strike. The cumulative effect of that campaign was genuinely remarkable. Russia's Black Sea fleet ended up pulling major surface combatants back from Sevastopol, its traditional home port in Crimea, and relocating them to ports much further from the front, specifically because the threat from these unmanned vessels made staying in place too costly to sustain. That's sea denial achieved by a country with no real traditional navy, purely through persistent use of a cheap, expendable, uncrewed platform. If the U.S. Navy is now validating a similar category of capability in the Gulf, even starting with what looks like a single demonstrative strike, that's the kind of precedent that suggests this isn't going to stay a one-off news story. It's a proof of concept for a tactic that's already been shown in a different theater to meaningfully change how a much larger and more capable Navy has to operate. I also want to zoom out one more time because I think the Corsair strike is really just one visible piece of something much larger happening across the entire U.S. military right now. A real structural shift toward autonomous and uncrewed systems across every domain at once, not just one platform in one war. We've already talked about Lucas in the air, an uncrewed one-way attack drone built specifically to be cheap and expendable rather than exquisite and expensive. We've talked about directed energy systems like HELIOS and ODIN handling at least some portion of the air defense mission without needing an interceptor missile fired by a crewed system every single time. And now you've got an uncrewed surface vessel handling an offensive naval strike mission that would have previously required either a submarine, a manned aircraft, or a much riskier special operations approach. Put those three things together and you start to see a pattern. The U.S. military is actively building out a layered ecosystem of expendable autonomous systems across air, sea, and defensive domains simultaneously, specifically so that the exquisite, expensive crewed platforms, your destroyers, your stealth bombers, your fighter squadrons, can be reserved for the targets and missions that genuinely require that level of capability, while those more routine, repetitive, or higher-risk tasks get handed off to systems that don't put American lives directly at risk if something goes wrong. That's a meaningful shift in overall military doctrine. And this war is turning out to be the proving ground, where a lot of these individual pieces are getting validated together in real combat conditions for the first time. I want to be honest that there's a lot about this specific capability that hasn't been made public yet, and I think it's worth flagging those gaps rather than pretending the story is more complete than it actually is. CENTCOM confirmed the strike happened and confirmed it was the first combat use of this type of platform, but there's been no detailed public breakdown of exactly how these vessels are controlled during a mission, whether that's fully autonomous target selection, remote human operators making the final engagement decision, or some hybrid approach where the vessel navigates autonomously but a human confirms the actual strike. That distinction matters a lot for understanding exactly what this capability actually represents, and it's the kind of detail the military typically keeps fairly close to the chest for good reason, since publicizing the finer details of how a strike system is actually controlled would hand potential adversaries useful information about how to try to counter or disrupt it. We also don't have public numbers on things like total range, endurance, how many of these vessels the Navy currently has fielded, or how they're actually being deployed and launched, whether that's from a mothership, a forward operating location, or some other basing concept. What we do have is a single, confirmed, successful strike against a real defended target, which is meaningful in itself. First combat uses often reveal a lot about a program's actual maturity level. If a system fails badly in its debut, that tells you it wasn't ready. The fact that this mission reportedly went off successfully against a real submarine maintenance facility suggests the underlying technology has moved well past the experimental testing phase, even if a lot of the finer operational details remain appropriately classified for now. All right, here's where I land on this one. Out of everything this war has debuted so far, and there's been a lot, I think the Corsair strike might actually be one of the more quietly important developments, even though it didn't generate nearly as much attention as some of the bigger single strikes I've covered in other videos. The reason I say that is because this isn't just a new missile or a new drone doing the same basic job a little better or a little cheaper. It's an entirely new category of platform, an uncrewed vessel operating independently in a contested maritime environment to physically strike a target inside a defended naval facility. The closest real precedent for this is actually Ukraine's campaign in the Black Sea, where explosive unmanned surface vessels helped Ukraine impose real sea denial against a much larger Russian fleet, forcing Russian naval assets to operate more cautiously and pull back from parts of that theater entirely. Seeing the US military validate a similar capability in actual combat, for the first time, in a theater as contested as the Strait of Hormuz, tells me this is very likely the beginning of a much bigger shift in how naval presence and naval strikes get conducted going forward, not just in this specific war, but as a durable piece of how the Navy operates going forward in any contested coastal environment. I also think this fits into a broader pattern I've been noticing throughout this whole war, a real preference for finding ways to accomplish military objectives while minimizing the number of American lives directly exposed to risk. Unmanned drones in the air, now unmanned vessels on the water, alongside laser defenses intercepting incoming threats before they ever reach a crewed platform at all. That's not a small trend, that's a real shift in how modern warfare against a determined asymmetric adversary is actually being conducted in real time. And I think we're going to look back at this specific war as the moment a lot of these individual pieces, drones, lasers, autonomous vessels, all got proven out together in the same conflict for the first time. So that's the story behind this latest first autonomous attack boats striking a defended Iranian naval facility, disabling infrastructure that services Iran's midget submarine fleet without a single American sailor anywhere near the target. This is genuinely one of the more forward-looking developments in a war that's already produced an unusual number of combat firsts, and I'll keep tracking how this specific capability gets used going forward, especially if we start seeing it deployed at larger scale or against different target types. What do you guys think? Does this kind of unmanned, expendable strike capability change how you think about future naval conflicts? Or is this just one more tool in an already crowded toolbox? Let me know in the comments below. I read everyone. If this kind of hardware deep dive is what you come to this channel for, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. It helps me keep bringing you both the fast-moving news updates and these deeper technical breakdowns. Check out the video right here next. This is Ryan, also known as Max Afterburner, also known as the fighter pilot next door, signing off.